So I haven't done one of these making of animations for a while now, so I thought it might be interesting. I'm working right now on a sequence that will fit into the beginning of book 3. It's on the second day of book 3. MC is somewhat upset about where he is, and he's very upset with some of the people involved. And he's not hesitant to show it. Boom. Okay, let's look at how this is being set up. There's actually two specific compositions here, starting with the sequence here with the fireball, which was inspired by a anime sequence, and then the second one, which is the impact of the fireball. So let's look at the first one, the spin with effects. So let's break down the various layers here. The very beginning, of course, is just the animation. Let's see. That's not correct. Spin anim. Okay, so this is rendered in DAZ again. It's a relatively small 120 frame animation. And it's got nothing specific on it. It's got motion trackers, because I tried to get it to autocomplete the eyes, then I gave up. And that's how long that lasts. Let's pull this out a little bit. At this point, it'll transition into the second animation there, which is the... it's not that. Let's see, the zoom anim. There. Which is will pull out. So those two animations basically form... here, you see I forgot a light. Anyway. It's a light that only exists for that one frame, and then it gets moved somewhere else. Not a big deal. I didn't notice it. No one else will. On top of this, we start playing with effects. And the first one we do is we add Saber, our ever-loving... okay. And the Saber effect, let's check this, is used for pretty much all my special effects when it comes to how magic is employed. By default, Saber is a very simple effect, but you can get a lot of control over it because it knows how to work with like a bunch of stuff like layers and masks. So in this case, I've got one on the front and one on the back, because it disappears when he zooms over. The second effect we add is another Saber effect. It's going to be the beam of light that comes out of here. And this is actually a very, very simple Saber effect. By default, Saber, when you set up a new one, and then you can control it like that. You can adjust stuff like the size, the glow, intensity on the size, and you can play with flickers and distortions. Let's pull that down a little bit. And now that makes it kind of flicker over time. You can have distortions. And you can distort either the glow around it or the core itself. So it's a very simple little toy, but I get endless enjoyment and amusement out of it. Okay, the next thing we add is this null pointer, and this is basically a tracker that shows where I want the center of the fireball to be. Now, it's a little complicated in this case because the fireball's actually going behind him for a while, so I'm going to need two ones. I'm going to have one in front of him, this one, and this fireball is just a particular asset. Particular is a particle system. Let's see. That's right, I pre-composited that. So here we have a particular layer, and then we have an adjustment layer on top of that just to put a little bit more glow on it. Now, at this point, the fireball is about to go behind his hand. And if I just render that and leave it on, it's going to look really crap. It's going to like be glowing here at this point, and we don't want that. But we still want the fireball to stick around, so what we do is we duplicate this guy and stick a second one behind him. So right now that one's invisible. As it pans around his hand, we hide the old one, and we take the new one and show it. And then we do the same trick, and it's even easier here because his hand is off screen, so we don't even need to fade it. And it's in front of his hand again. So that's the core of it. Obviously, because we haven't rendered the room rotating around him, we're going to need to fake that. And the first thing we do is we add a little bit of smoke, and we're going to pan the smoke in such a way that it looks a little bit like it's moving in the right direction. And then add a simple background. That's it. That's the whole effect. The stuff that takes time here, obviously rendering the basic character takes a little bit of time, but not that bad. Rendering timing the effect takes a fair amount of time, just making sure that the particles and the various things move to coordinate with the character. And then just playing with what's called VisDev, the visual development of an effect, making sure it looks the way I want it to, make sure it feels good. Getting this kind of charge effect to work took a while, but it's good fun. So that's the first part. The second one is much simpler. Partially it is because there's only two characters here, and the characters are actually not animated because they're so tiny on screen. So we start with, let's see, hide everything. We start with the original background. And this is just a Shutterstock image of grass. Over time, what we're going to do is we're going to replace that with this burnt content. And to do that, we're timing that so that the burn follows the shockwave of the explosion. This is the primary explosion. So at this point, boom, and we're going to be following that curve outwards to leave the idea that it's kind of burnt its way through the grass. And we're leaving this patch here where MC is standing just to give the feeling that while this massive explosion happens, he's completely unhurt and unfazed by it. Okay, we add in our enemy. He's going to be here. And we're going to add in the player. And both of these, again, are just single frame animation, single frames in DAZ. I could have animated them, but... And at this point, he's no longer needed, so boom, bye-bye. The next layer we put on is the beam. And the reason why I'm centering all this around the beam is just to make sure that he is rotated. Well, you can see I messed up a little bit. The original rotation had him pointing up here. And so I just, because it's top down, I could just rotate it. It means that his shadow's a little bit off this guy, but I don't think anyone notices. Alternatively, I could have rotated them and tried again, but be lazy. We have, again, Saber. I love Saber. It's my favorite toy in the world. And we try to kind of get a good color match with the previous one. It's not quite the same, but it's close enough. Now, what I've done here is you can see as I animate, you can see the start size, the end size. That's going to give us that effect of it's initially heavy on the back end, and then it's going to move gradually across to him. It strikes. At this point, we're going to change the center of gravity of it from here to here. So right now, start size is 87, end size is 171, so it's almost complete. And then we're going to have it die out gradually. As if it was a striking bolt. The next thing we do is we add the enemy shields. And I'm going to leave you to guess what I used for this. Oh yeah. So I drew a mask, applied Saber to it, and that's going to get us kind of this glowing thing. This is actually the very default Saber effect, and I use it a lot for shields. But it doesn't really convince you that that it's a shield that covers him. So we duplicate it, place it on top of him, and mask out everything but the glow. And now you get the feeling that he's actually being covered overhead by something. Not that it's much help. So at this point, the effect strikes him, and you can see the ground here, because of our mask, is starting to burn. And the idea is the shield is going to contain the fireball for a while. And then at this point, shield goes boom, and the fire will expand. So let's look at that one first. The inner explosion is what we use for fireball hits him, boom, expands to the shield, then overwhelms the shields and pushes outwards. And this one here this is the first time I'm using stock images for this one. And this is just, I took this big 4K explosion someone else had made. Originally it looked like that, which is a little bit too tame. Like in general, Love and Magic tends to use super saturated colors, and so I'm just taking a curve, which is a way of controlling the brightness of something, and just pulling it up a little bit to make it feel hyper-saturated. And the reason why I put it in the composition is I want to be able to mask just the chunk I need. So back to this. And now you see this little inner explosion thing. It hits here. When it hits, I start to animate it. Boom. And it's using a mask so that it's constraining it to be inside the same sphere as everything else. I don't want anything leaking out. That's going to give the feeling that the shield is not there or doing anything. So instead, the shield contains the explosion and then dies out with him. A transition could have been better, but at this point we already covered it by the next effect. And this is not a stock image or stock photo. So as that one starts to die down, we play our next effect. And obviously that's gonna make things feel pretty oversaturated as it is. So a lot of the smaller stuff that's happening is not going to be noticeable. But if we just left it on its own, we've zoomed this thing in quite a lot. And so it's going to look relatively blurry and pixely. So what we did is, on top of that, we layer a new animation effect. It's just a shockwave. And finally, I like putting in just a little bit of fog in various places. Very often tune down the transparency so it's not so aggressive. But the fog basically allows us to get this feeling of complexity relatively cheaply. So in this case, it's very faded, but it does break up. This is a 4K overlay of fog. Let's see, just there. That's how it looks soloed. And again, we're using a mask to control where it goes. So again, the fog, basically what it does is it allows us to get complexity in a scene relatively cheaply. And in this case also it gives the feeling that things have been set on fire. So there you have it. It's not what I would call a very complex scene. It sits kind of between the big cutscenes that I spend way too much time on, like the end of Act 11, and the little 4 to 8 frame looping animations I sometimes use as replacements for still images. It's kind of a middle ground between those two. Maybe something like, I would say maybe 3 or 4 hours to pose and do it in DAZ, and then another 2 hours, 3 hours doing VizDev, and then a couple iterations of tweaking. And the thing that takes time on tweaking is just rendering it. It's like a 30-minute render because of all the special effects. And that's causing, like, when you want to time stuff and make sure everything feels good, it means that iteration time is quite high. But it's okay, I can do other stuff while it's rendering. It's not like it needs my attention. So there you have it. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll get back to finishing up book 2 and starting book 3.